As we continue our week-long coverage of the tragedy in Tucson today, I'm joined by CBS News chief political consultant Marc Ambinder. Sarah Palin has released an 8-minute video statement today in which she blames the media for fanning the flames of hate. So, Marc, let's start with you and talk about that and take a look.
Well, it's a remarkable video for several reasons. For several days, Sarah Palin has said nothing. She has been accused, mainly by people on the left, of perhaps creating some of the climate that might have led the alleged assailant to do what he did.
Yeah, but specifically for the crosshair advertisement.
For the most, the crosshair advertisement, which is a trope of sorts that people on both sides have used for a long time. But it's fair to say that she's been under some degree of criticism. But if you look at the video and you look at the scope of what she says, it's almost presidential-esque. Let's take a look a little bit and go from there.
But especially within hours of a tragedy unfolding, journalists and pundits should not manufacture a blood libel that serves only to incite the very hatred and violence that they purport to condemn. That is reprehensible.
How do you think this affects her stature? I mean, she looks almost presidential.
Right. I think it makes her the most prominent Republican, in a sense, to respond or to pre-spawn to what President Obama is going to say tonight. And of course, the president has an enormously difficult task because so many people are appropriating different things out of this incident. And the president is primarily there to share the grief of everyone and might not live up to people's expectations if they have significant expectations. But Sarah Palin, in a sense, has thrown a gauntlet, in a sense politicizing what she accuses other people of politicizing. She uses the phrase blood libel. Which is very interesting because, you know, originally the phrase obviously meant the libel on the Jewish people that they used the blood of Christians. Right. But it's come to mean something broader, hasn't it? Right, and in her sense, it simply means blaming, you know, her campaign rhetoric for the actions of a deranged lone individual. And she has she's very skillful at using events like this and criticism directed at her as a way of not only playing the victim, but in a sense rousing people to her own cause. You see this over and over again, regardless of what happens with Sarah Palin. So in some sense, what you hear on the video isn't new, but what is new is the setting and the scope of what she says. And there's a strain of optimism throughout it, as you would hear in a presidential address. So be very interested to see the reactions from other Republicans in particular, whether she is able to become, in a sense, the spokesperson for Republicans out of an event like this.
Talk about pre-buttles. Unplugged spoke with Democratic Congressman Bob Filner of California yesterday. He has condemned the Tea Party and linked Saturday's shooting to the conservative movement. Our Nancy Cordes noted to him that several Tea Party leaders have come out and said there's no indication that Jared Loughner is affiliated with the Tea Party and that to make these accusations is irresponsible. Take a listen.
Well, you know, that in itself is a political statement because they are not taking responsibility for any of the violent rhetoric that they had during the campaign. I mean, Miss Palin would say, you know, we can't retreat, we have to reload. You know about the 20 targeted figures with crosshairs. By saying it was a crazy individual, that relieves them of the responsibility. Sure, he was crazy, but crazy people are especially vulnerable to the kind of hate rhetoric, the delegitimizing of our government officials, the rhetoric that said we have to reload and let's eliminate these people.
Congressman Bob Filner demonstrating that this argument has a way of becoming circular.
Well, look, a lot of Democrats were the subject and you could say target of a lot of that rhetoric, so they take it very, very personally, and I think that's what you're seeing with Congressman Filner. But in a sense, the Tea Party has a point. They're really, for the most part, with some exceptions, and there are some notable exceptions, the rhetoric they used was heated, but it wasn't out of line with the broad history of American political rhetoric. That doesn't mean, of course, that you can't make an argument that Americans and politicians should think before they speak and should do their best to distinguish themselves in what they say from the rantings of lunatics. But that doesn't at all say that perhaps the Tea Party was responsible or bears some burden of responsibility for this. But I can see why members of Congress, particularly Democrats, are very sensitive to this, because they ran in this environment. Every week they'd be at a campaign event. They'd be accused of being socialist. They'd be accused of being illegitimate. It's very personal to them.
And there's now discussion in Congress, of course, about protection for
Right.
members. There's even one bill to put an enclosure around the gallery.
Right. I'm not sure. I mean, what that says about people's faith in the Capitol Police. One would assume that they would be able to screen out explosives. You know, today, of course, the U.S. Capitol Police and officials from the U.S. Secret Service is also briefing both members of both houses separately, both Republicans and Democrats separately, on security measures, what practically can be done, how to report a threat, what types of communications tend to be more inappropriate, and a basic thing like how do you advance, is the word in politics we call it, but how do you set up an event in a way that makes it marginally more safe for everyone there? You ask a local police officer perhaps to sit there in a squad car. There are some practical things that members of Congress can do that won't cost a lot, but also won't limit their access to people, which is, of course, the sine qua non of their job.